Welcome to the Free Will Show. I'm one of your hosts, Taylor Sear.
And I'm your other host, Matt Flummer.
This is the final episode of Season 1 of the Free Will Show, and it's a Q&A episode. So we'll take questions that we've heard all season long from our listeners, and we'll address them.
All right. So in the previous 8 episodes, we have talked about lots of different arguments and positions related to free will. For instance, we talk about threats to free will from logical fatalism, theological fatalism, and determinism.
That's right. And we talk about various positions and arguments in the debate about causal determinism and free will. We talked about the consequence argument and the manipulation argument, which are both arguments against compatibilism or for incompatibilism.
Mm-hmm. And we've also talked about problems for incompatibilism, like the luck argument.
Right. I guess that's an argument against libertarian views.
Libertarianism, yeah. We have to be precise here.
That's right. Well, they are incompatibilist views of free will, but they also, libertarians are committed to free will. Yeah.
That's right.
And then we talked about other luck issues, moral luck problems for any view of freedom and responsibility. And we talked about Frankfurt-style cases, which try to show that we could be morally responsible even if we don't have alternative possibilities.
Yeah. Is that it? Is that everything we've done?
I think that's what we've done. I mean, you and I talked a little bit before we started interviewing other philosophers about why I care about free will, what free will might be taken to be, why it's valuable, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
That was good.
All right. Well, let's get into the questions. How about that?
Sounds good.
So one question, this is a question that I've actually wondered before too. We've talked about this problem of luck for libertarian views of free will. Is there a problem of luck for compatibilists? So you might think that maybe it's a matter of luck, the way things were a million years ago, and everything you do is entailed by what happened a million years ago. So it's luck. What do you think?
Yeah, that way of putting it sounds a lot like the consequence argument, which we chatted about in episode 5 with Peter Van Imwagen, because it seems like what you're saying is, well, it's not up to us what the laws of nature or the distant past are like. So if determinism is true, what we do now is entailed by those things. It's not up to us either. That sounds like that kind of luck. So yeah, I guess that is a worry for compatibilists insofar as that's an argument for incompatibilism. But there are other,
not necessarily luck worry. Yeah.
It doesn't have to be
about it in terms of control.
Yeah. Yeah. Or up to oneness.
Yeah.
But the luck worries that came up in our episode on moral luck recently, maybe some of those are even more pressing for compatibilists because, say, take the problem of constitutive luck. You know, if what your character is like, what you desire, what your preferences are, if all of that is sort of given by the past and the laws, as it seems like they would be in a deterministic world, it seems like it's not really up to you, or it's outside of your control, how you act on the basis of that character. So maybe there's a connection between that and compatibilism too.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to ask me if there's a problem of luck for compatibilists that's like exactly parallel to the problem of luck for libertarians.
I can ask you that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Taylor, is there a problem of luck that is exactly parallel to the problem of luck for libertarians?
That's a great question, Matt. I'm glad you brought it up. The answer is no. I'm just kidding.
I'm glad we settled that.
Some people have raised a worry for compatibilists that is parallel. Yes. So the idea is, the way that Al Mealy put it in our episode 6 was in terms of like a cross-world difference. So if the libertarian is right, then it seems like for directly free actions, it has to be the case that you could have done otherwise at the very moment of choice, the moment of free action. So there had to have been some other possible world with the same past and laws of nature, but in which you did otherwise or decided otherwise. So what's weird about trying to raise that problem for compatibilists is compatibilists don't require that there be such indeterminacy at the time of action. Most of them are okay with indeterminacy. They don't require determinism. But Yeah, they don't require that, so you might think, well, the problem doesn't really arise for them. But some people have tried to say, well, even still, there are things that are outside of the agent's control right there around the time of action, like what occurs to them, maybe what their character is, to go back to constitutive luck. There's lots that's sort of outside of their control right there around the time of action. And so it's, even if the world is deterministic, there's a nearby possible world. Yeah, the past or the laws would have to be different slightly, but there is a nearby possible world where they do otherwise. And if, that cross-world difference looks to be outside of their control, then there would be a parallel problem.
So is this worry related to the situationist worry? So in some of the literature regarding situationism, they talk about these experiments that psychologists have done where they'll pipe the smell of fresh baked cookies into a room, and then people act more virtuously, or some of them, they found a coin right before they acted and they were more likely to help someone in need.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good example of what could be going on around the time of action that would make a difference in the agent's behavior across these worlds, even if the world's deterministic. So yeah, I think that's one way of pressing the worry, but anything right there around the time of action, whether it's like what occurs to an agent, how they're feeling at that time, all these things that, are outside of our control, but, could affect how we act. That's a way of trying to raise this parallel problem for compatibilists.
How would a compatibilist respond to this worry?
Yeah, good question. I guess
you're our token compatibilist for this episode, so you have to answer this.
Okay. I have written some on this actually, so I've thought about it. It's been a while. I guess the way that some people raise this problem is by saying either there's cross-world present luck at the time of action, or there's constitutive luck, in which case it seems like total constitutive luck, where the person doesn't have any control over their character at all, and that is what leads to their action. So this is sometimes called the luck pincer. There's a philosopher named Neil Levy who's written a book called Hard Luck, developing this argument in some detail. I guess my thought is maybe it is the case that lots of the time there are these features of our environment, what occurs to us, that sort of thing that could make a difference. But I don't know that there's any reason to think that there must be some such feature in the case of every determined action. Mm-hmm. And so that would be a way out of the pincer, is to say, well, yeah, not all cases of putatively free action would be undermined by this cross-world. There's a way of handling the problem of constitutive luck, which is just so I think there is an answer, but yeah, for the purposes of the question, there's something of a parallel problem. It's just not quite as poignant as it is for libertarianism, because libertarians have this commitment that indeterminacy is required for free action.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. I was going to ask you a question about Frankfurt-style cases. Take us back to a different episode 7. So Carolina Sartorio presented Frankfurt-style case, and one objection that we asked her about was what's called the dilemma defense of PAP. So PAP is the principle of alternative possibilities, says that to be morally responsible, an agent must have had alternative possibilities or must have been able to do otherwise. It looks like in a Frankfurt-style case that the agent in question is responsible but lacks alternatives. So it seems like a counterexample to PAP. But the dilemma defense says either we're presupposing determinism in the case or we're presupposing indeterminism. And either way, there's a problem. If we are assuming determinism, it seems like we're sort of begging the question against the incompatibilist. But if we're presupposing indeterminism, and there's real indeterminacy at the time of the agent's action, it seems like there might be alternative possibilities. So for someone who thinks, yeah, there's no good way of running an indeterministic Frankfurt-style case, maybe they'll think that the Frankfurt case doesn't have any force. I think someone brought that up on social media or in an email at some point. Mm-hmm. So what do you think about that, Matt?
Yeah, I think that for the original the original. For a lot of the original, there's been lots of different versions of these cases. But if we're thinking about a lot of these early Frankfurt cases, I think that's a legitimate way to go. We also, in that episode, talked about the Mealy-Robb case, and I think the Mealy-Robb case presents you with a Frankfurt case that doesn't fall into the dilemma. So just to review a little bit, the Mealy-Robb case is a case of causal preemption. So you have to imagine that there's some kind of deterministic causal chain that's in place that will cause the person's behavior only if they don't cause their own behavior in some way before or is it before? Yeah, before the causal preemption chain takes place. It just so happens that the person causes their own behavior, so they do whatever it is, steal the car or vote on their own, and the deterministic cause doesn't come into play. So it's a counterfactual cause here. In that case, we've got indeterminism built into the case. The person, indeterministically caused their own behavior, so it doesn't fall into the determined part of the dilemma. And I don't know, it's like it kind of maybe splits the horns of the dilemma. Some people still worry that there's some way in which the agent's behavior is determined, but it's like some kind of different kind of determinism. It's not the normal way, like where the past and the laws of nature cause your behavior in a way that there's only one way that you can act. Yeah.
Right. So the agent's decision or action, it's going to happen. It's sort of determined to happen, but because of the two causal processes, it might happen one way or it might happen the other. So like it's the manner of the actions being performed is undetermined. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And then I guess the natural response, maybe natural is not the right word. The next stage in the debate after the Mealy-Robb case came out was the flicker defense. And the flicker defense states that even in the Mealy-Robb case, there is a flicker of an alternative possibility. So if you think of the primary thing that people are responsible for in these kinds of cases are usually thought to be decisions rather than overt actions. So it's not just you're voting a particular way or you're stealing the car. It's you're deciding to vote a particular way and you're deciding to steal the car. And even in the Mealy-Robb case, where there's this causal preemption that's going to force you to act in a certain way, the alternatives here that the Mealy-Robb case cannot take away are you're doing the thing on your own, which is the actual case, or you being forced to do the thing. And so the defender of the flicker defense is going to say something like, well, even in this case, for what really matters, you deciding to do this thing, you do have an alternative possibility. And that's you either do the thing on your own or you do the thing by being forced or caused by this deterministic cause.
Nice.
So what's the problem with the flicker defense, Taylor?
I could see someone saying that that this flicker of freedom, this alternative possibility that's left in the case, is not sufficiently robust to ground the agent's moral responsibility. So maybe this isn't going to work. So what does that mean? Well, maybe it's true that there is this flicker of freedom. There's this alternative possibility where they make the decision by being forced to do it. But in that scenario, they're not morally responsible for making the decision. It's something that they're forced to do. Like no one's responsible for that. So how could it be that having that flicker of freedom in which, that alternative possibility where the agent's not morally responsible, how could that be relevant to the agent's, freedom and responsibility in the original scenario where they do the thing on their own? And the debate continues. There's a whole cottage industry of work on the Frankfurt style cases.
Yeah, if we want to continue talking about this, I think my favorite part of this has been some friends of ours have published papers where they say, well, actually, there's a third option. It's not just that you decide to do the thing on your own, or you are caused to do the thing, but there's also an omission that there's lots of different ways this could work out. You either omit to decide to do this thing, or you refrain, or something like that, however you want to describe it. So this third option, according to the defenders of the flicker defense, they say is robust enough because you can be morally responsible for omissions. What do you think about that?
We should have our friends on the show to talk about
I
this
know,
at some
we should.
point. Yeah. It would be great to hear more about it. Yeah. I think we should probably move on from Frankfurt cases, though, as fun as they may be. Maybe they'll come up later on as we talk more about determinism and free will in later seasons. But maybe we should go back a bit and talk about the threats to free will. They're sort of rooted in the fixity of the past.
Yeah. So in the first interview that we did with John Martin Fisher, he seemed to think that, and I don't know if he's not alone in this, I think, that the primary driver of all these threats to free will, from logical fatalism, divine foreknowledge, determinism, the main mechanism at play that's driving these arguments is the fixity of the past. And that we've got this idea that the past is fixed, it's set, it's over and done with. Mm-hmm. This saying, no use crying over spilled milk, comes up over and over again.
Right.
We need to come up with another one. There's no use crying over spilled graham crackers. How about that? Like, we have kids, we have spilled graham crackers all over the place.
That's the way the cookie crumbles.
Yeah. So we have a question about this. You want to explain the question? Yeah.
Well, I guess one way of putting it most generally is, well, why should we think that the past is fixed?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it is intuitive that, and we do have sayings like there's no use crying over graham crackers. Well, maybe we will at some point. But
my kids cry over broken graham crackers. Have you ever had this situation where you pull the graham cracker out of the package and it's the only one left and it's broken and they don't want it and they're crying because they don't want a broken graham cracker?
You have some perfectionist children.
Your kids don't do this? Well, one of your kids is too young to cry over graham crackers in the first place.
Right. Yeah, she's never had a graham cracker. Yeah, I don't think we've had any tears over broken graham crackers yet. Yeah, well, anyway, so why I think that the past is outside of our control? Well, one kind of natural way to go with this is to bring in questions about time, the metaphysics of time. Like, what's so special about the past? Because we definitely think that the past is over and done with, but the future is open. And what would make sense of that? And, one person asked, does it have to do with what you think about the metaphysics of time? Like, which theory of what times exist is true? So there's a debate in metaphysics about the ontology of time, which times exist. Does only the present exist and only presently existing things exist? That's the presentist view. And there's other views like eternalism or the block universe view, where time's a lot like space. Maybe it's just another dimension along with the three spatial dimensions, but all times, past, present, and future, are equally real. They exist on this view. And so, dinosaurs are just as real as you are, even though they're not here now, right? So you might think, well, maybe that makes a difference because on the presentist view, the past doesn't exist, but on the eternalist view, it does. Does that make a difference to whether we think the past is fixed? Or another debate in the philosophy of time that you might ask if it makes a difference is a debate about the reality of tense. So some people think that tense statements, well, there's different kinds of tense statements. There's things like something's being past, something's being present, something's being future. Those kinds of tense statements. Sometimes we use the boring labels in philosophy of the A statements or the A properties, the A series. And then there's these other kinds of statements that are about temporally, I'll just say temporal relations, like being earlier than, later than, simultaneous with. And those are sometimes called B relations, B series, B properties, that kind of thing. So maybe if you think that all A properties, like being past, being present, being future, are really reducible to the relational B properties, well, then there's no objective feature of, tense in reality. It's really just relational features, like something's earlier than you or later than you. And maybe that makes a difference to whether the past is over and done with, fixed, outside of our control. I'm not so sure. I think this is worth thinking more about. Maybe we can dedicate episodes down the line to time and free will. But one thing that came up, maybe you'll want to talk about this in the episode with Linda Zagzebski on theological fatalism, is, well, maybe in order to figure out why the past would be fixed, we'd have to look at other issues in metaphysics.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have thoughts about that?
Yeah. I thought that Linda's point was really interesting, and I haven't really thought about. Well, let me explain what she said first, and then we'll talk about it. Mm-hmm. Instead of thinking about the fixity of the past as being the driver for these arguments threatening free will, Linda's point was that it's really the cause and effect relationship that's driving why we would even think the fixity of the past is important. Because in our experience, we see causes preceding effects all the time. And when we think of cause and effect, we think of this ordered relationship where the cause has to come first and the effect has to come later than, or however you want to describe this with A theory and B theory. Mm-hmm. And it's really this relationship, the cause and effect relationship, that makes us think that the past is fixed, because in all of our experience in everyday life, every kind of causal relationship we've ever seen, we can't change an effect once the cause has already produced the effect, or we can't go back and make the cause not cause the effect in our experience. And that's the real reason why we think this.
Yeah, interesting. That's actually related to one increasingly popular response to the challenge from theological fatalism that's sometimes just called the dependent solution. I know I'm going a little out of order in our notes, but maybe it's worth saying what that is. So the challenge from divine foreknowledge is something like this. Well, if God knew in the past what I would do, the past is fixed, God's infallible. Seems like I'm not free to do otherwise, because I can't make God have a different or a false belief in the past, something like that. So one view is, well, the reason God believed, say, 1,000 years ago that we'd be recording this conversation now is because we're recording this conversation now. Mm-hmm. Right? His knowledge and his beliefs depends on the world and on what we do, at least in some cases, rather than the other way around. And if you think that's the way that God knows and the sort of the order of explanation between our actions and God's beliefs, you might think as well that when we're assessing whether we can do otherwise, whether we're free, well, we shouldn't hold fixed any facts or anything that depends on what we do. So if God's knowledge or his beliefs depend on what we do, we shouldn't hold those beliefs fixed, even though they're part of the past. Don't hold them fixed when assessing whether you're free to do otherwise now. So yeah, it might be that we're having this conversation now. God knew it would be taking place now. He knew that 1,000 years ago. And yet I'm free to make it such that God had a different belief 1,000 years ago, because, well, had we not had this conversation now, had I, just hung up on you right this second, God would have had a different belief 1,000 years ago, because his knowledge depends on reality in that way.
Yeah.
So that's one alternative solution that we didn't really get into in that episode. Maybe if we have another season down the line dedicated to theological fatalism and responses, we could give this newish dependence
Maybe
view.
If we did have a season like that on the schedule for next fall.
Maybe if we had thought about that at some point. Yeah. There's another view though, right?
Yeah, since we're talking about the problem of divine foreknowledge, one view that we didn't talk about that has really been popular most recently, probably, we talked about like these historical views like Ockhamism and Boethianism, but open theism is a view that's partially a response to this problem of divine foreknowledge, and it's also partially a response for the problem of evil. That's pretty recent, and the view is that God doesn't know what people are going to do before they do it, people who have free will. And they usually try to motivate the view in a way like this. So there's certain things that are logically impossible, like drawing a square circle or being an unmarried bachelor. Those things are logically impossible. And most
You mean a
theists,
married bachelor? I think you can be
did
an
I say it
unmarried
wrong?
bachelor.
Yeah. Correct. That is logically possible.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so being an unmarried bachelor is logically impossible.
No, I still got it backwards. Being a married bachelor is impossible.
Why do I keep doing that?
It's been a while since you were a bachelor.
It has been a while. Yeah. Okay, yeah, so being a married bachelor, third time's a charm. Most theists think that even God can't do things that are logically impossible. So God can't draw a square circle. God can't create a married bachelor. Got it right that time.
Nice.
And then they try to make this comparison between things that are logically impossible and beliefs or knowledge that's logically impossible. So God doesn't know what a square circle looks like. He also doesn't know what, I don't know, what's another good example? He doesn't know what a married bachelor would look like, I guess. And so they're going to say something like, well, it's not possible for God to know what a creature with free will would do before they do it. And
Right.
So we get this view of open theism. And it's a nice way, not that it's true, but it's a nice, clean solution to the problem where we get to deny this premise in the argument that God knew beforehand what you would do before you did it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good explanation of like one motivation for open theism. I think if you're an open theist, that it's more plausible to say that there's just no truths about future free actions that would ground God's knowledge. So maybe you think that, and maybe this is connected with that stuff in the philosophy of time that one of our other listeners asked us about. But yeah, if there's just no fact of the matter about the future in some sense, well then, yeah, how is God going to be in a position to know anything about the future? So they could wed those views together.
Yeah, we talked about bivalence with Alicia Finch.
Right.
So they would be denying bivalence when it comes to what people do, right?
Yeah, at least in the future tense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, cool.
All right. So we're still on this topic of freedom and foreknowledge. One of the solutions that we talked about was monolinism. So let's deal with a question that we had from someone. I don't even remember where it came from. Let me just say the question. I'm getting tongue-tied. Can monolinists endorse the consequence argument? So what's the problem here? Why would monolinists not be able to endorse the consequence argument?
Yeah. Well, maybe we should say a little bit about Molinism and the consequence argument.
No, everybody knows what this is.
You can go listen to our earlier episodes, I guess. Right. So, well, one thing you called Molinism a solution. I tend to think, like Linda Zagzebski said in that episode, that maybe it's not really a solution because it gives you an account of how God could have some kind of providence or he could have some control over what happens in the world. But it really doesn't explain where the argument for theological fatalism goes wrong.
Yeah, let me go back and say quasi-solution.
Proposed solution. Yeah, alleged. Putative solution. Yeah. Right. Okay, so what's the solution supposed to be? Well, the idea is God has middle knowledge. We won't say what that's in the middle of, but the basic idea is he knows how all possible agents like us would freely act in all possible circumstances. And that's knowledge that he has that he can use in creating the world. So he can decide what kind of world to create based on his knowledge of what would happen in all sorts of circumstances, including how free agents like us would act in various circumstances. So one classic worry for Molinism, and this isn't about its being a solution to this problem that we've been talking about. An independent problem for Molinism is that, well, what is going to be the grounds or explanation of these, we might call them counterfactuals of creaturely freedom, these facts about how all these possible creatures would freely act in various circumstances. The grounding objection to Molinism says, well, there's no grounds for them, and that's problematic for one reason or another. Yeah. Now, if you think that there is some grounds for these counterfactuals of freedom in terms of what we as agents do, maybe you could still endorse the consequence argument. But there's a worry that if you think that these truths are ungrounded, as many Molinists want to say, well, then it follows from these facts about what creatures would freely do in various circumstances, and from God's decision about which world to create or actualize, what we actually do is entailed by those things, and those things aren't grounded, and, well, at least the facts, the counterfactuals of freedom aren't grounded. God's decisions outside of our control, it happens either outside of time or before any of us existed. And so you can get a kind of entailment from these things that are outside of our control or that are not up to us. You can get an entailment from those things to facts about our behavior. So it looks like you can run a parallel consequence argument from the sort of Molinist commitments. So, you know, insofar as you're a Molinist and you want to affirm incompatibilist free will, you're a libertarian, well, then it looks like you either have to figure out what to say about this grounding worry, or you have to give up the consequence argument. And I suppose they could go either way.
Yeah, so is the transfer is going to be different in the case of this worry of the Molinism than it was for logical fatalism or theological fatalism or even determinism, right? So for logical fatalism, it was the transfer of necessity. And it was the same for the theological fatalist. But there's no necessity, is there, about these counterfactuals? So it's going to be a different kind of transfer?
They're contingent. Well, the thing is, there's going to be a necessary connection between God's decision to create plus the counterfactuals. There'll be a necessary connection between that on the one hand, and then the facts or the propositions about our actions. So as long as the first set of things is outside of our control, and there's a necessary connection between that and propositions about what we do, that is a transfer of necessity. Well, there is a principle of the transfer of necessity that runs along those lines. It's slightly different, you're right. This gets us into the weeds. There's a lot of literature on the various transfer principles. Yeah,
that stuff's beyond my pay grade, I think.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you want to talk about any other questions. Did you have any others that I don't think that any others came up from our listeners.
No, I think that we're at a good place.
All right. Well, yeah, that sounds good to me. Thanks, listeners, for tuning in this season and for listening to our Q&A episodes. Stay tuned for more seasons on different topics to come.
Yeah, and I want to thank all of our guests. That it's kind of like a dream come true for young philosopher wannabes to be able to interview all of these great philosophers who are extremely kind for giving up their time to be on our show.
I totally agree.
All right.
The end.